Greetings. I'm Dr. Fred Elrich from the University of Memphis, and I was asked by Dr. Dick Irwin, our Associate Provost, to put together some thoughts regarding how the university might come alongside Sedgwick and develop a leader development program. Well, if you hopefully have the 6 slides that I've sent along with this video. If not, just pause and either pull them up or print them out might be the better way. And we'll step through those. Again, this is, I guess, to some extent, my random stream of consciousness about the framework that we might use if we had the opportunity to work together. First of all, leadership or leading in organizations has a few characteristics that I'd like to point out on slide 1. First of all, it needs to be cultural. And frankly, every organization has a culture of leadership. It's not necessarily always a positive one, but there is one by default. And it seems to me that Sedgwick is interested in enhancing their culture of leadership in a purposeful way, which is certainly to your credit. Because it is cultural, it's got to be behavioral. We've got to impact the behavior of the folks in your organization, either to enhance behavior that meets the needs of the organization, or to change the behavior so that it does that. And fundamental to that is the fact that leadership and leadership development has to be personal. We've got to be able to reach people on their level, in their world, in their context, of course then within their scope of duties, but we've got to find a way to make the learning personal to them, kind of a keystone of adult education. And it's got to be communal or common so that people understand what's valued from a leadership perspective, and that it's shared, it's identified, and it's recognizable. Even more important than probably anything is that people recognize the type of leadership that is valued in the organization, and it gives other folks, especially down in the organization, it gives them a model to emulate, and that's when you know that that your work is pushing into the organization and it's gaining some attention, some positive attention. It's got to be valued. How are those behaviors rewarded? What does success look like? And if I'm an employee at Sedgwick, what's that mean to me? How do I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and that I'll be recognized and rewarded for demonstrating those type of leader behaviors? Certainly, we all know that leadership comes at any level of an organization. It's a 360-degree kind of thing. In fact, a book by John Maxwell that we use, 360-degree leadership, talks long and hard about that point. Great book, by the way. And finally, it's got to be directional. In other words, it moves the organization towards something. It moves, individuals find themselves moving towards something. And so that think of it as a journey over time, but that we're moving towards the kinds of things that the organization will value. So if you would, go moving on to slide 2. This is actually a visual aid that a guy named Patrick Lencioni uses. Wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and a number of other books. Actually, his new version of that is the 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team, which is an approach, an assessment that we use extensively in our practice. And he talks about the balance between organizations being either healthy or smart, or preferably both. On the smart side, there are things like technology and strategy, the finance, kind of the processes that keep an organization together and coordinated, and they are certainly important. The allure of those is that they tend to be more measurable. You can kind of grab onto them and you know how you're doing. Where are we in these processes? On the healthy side, which is what we're talking about here in terms of the leader side, the behavior side, we're looking for a culture that minimizes politics, doesn't eliminate it. Politics are part of people being together, but that minimizes confusion over goals, rewards, the direction that an organization is going. Confusion sometimes tends to be a pretty common theme in organizations, more so than we might think. And that leader behaviors that lead us towards higher morale. And of course, studies show that high morale gives us high productivity, which is always a good thing. And one of the outcomes is that we have low regrettable turnover. Regrettable turnover are when we lose folks that we really wish they'd stick around. So the healthy side of things, I'm sure that senior leaders in almost any organization from time to time kind of at least get a tug on their consciousness that we need to be doing some things to eliminate some of these negative outcomes that we're seeing. In other words, we need to do something to get healthy and possibly move down that path for a while. But there's just like the magnetic pull, the pull on the smart side, the things that we can measure tends to pull us back from continuing to pursue what some folks consider the softer side of things. So what do we do with that? How do we find a framework to come around that? Well, I would suggest if you look at the next slide, slide 3, are your core values. Certainly they are your core values because they represent outcomes. These are all outcomes, but there are behaviors that go behind that. But these are outcomes that you value as an organization. And so that seems to me to be a particularly great way to start, because these are values that are up in front of the organization now. My guess is that in your onboarding process, as you bring in new folks, or you have grown by acquisition when you bring in a new organization into the fold, that your core values are things that you start talking about pretty soon. And so again, that's something for people in the organization to see. Are we living our core values, or are we not? So again, just to kind of get the framework out there and get our conversation going about what this might look like, I would suggest that we start with your core values. And if you look at slide 4, you'll see that I've identified some of the competencies, some of the things, the behaviors that we might concentrate on that would enhance the embrace by the organization of those core values, that we would equip people to demonstrate these core values, that we would eliminate any confusion as to embracing change. So what does that mean to me? What do I need to know? What skills and knowledge, and more importantly, attitude do I have to embrace change, so that people around me watch me and can tell that I do embrace change. So again, using your core principles as the basis for this and lining it up with a lot of the material that we use in organizations kind of on a piecemeal basis. Here we're talking really about an integrated whole, which is pretty exciting for us. The kind of work that we really like to do is come alongside an organization to really embrace the things that are of value to them. So that kind of gives us our framework. Let me just talk a little bit, slide 5, about our instructional approach. It would be hybrid. This is something that we've done before. We do some face-to-face. There's certainly value in that. There's value in having senior leaders up front in face-to-face with folks in the program so that they see that commitment. There's even more so, there's a lot to be said about having employees spend time face-to-face and build relationships that they wouldn't have before. So the face-to-face component is certainly important, but large company like yours, north of 20,000 employees around the globe, certainly the online learning aspects is something that would be a key part here, and is one that we've got a lot of expertise in. Dr. Irwin and his folks have developed a lot of capabilities in that area, so that keeps us connected in between face-to-face sessions. It keeps us connected and keeps us learning. So we'd use a hybrid approach. We have a variety of assessments. Simulations and case studies are good hands-on ways to drive home some of these key principles. Lectures do have a place, and we would certainly use that where it was appropriate. And some activities, get up and move around and drive home some other points by some physical activities that we get a chance to do. And there are a few other things that we'd discover as we went along that we would blend in. So it's pretty action learning, pretty engaging type of approach. Where we could, we'd want to make it cohort based. And so what that means is that we would identify groups of people. 20 seems like a number that I'd throw out there, 16, 20, 24 in a cohort. And these folks would progress through the sequence of courses together. And so over time, they start to develop some very strong relationships that could certainly span their career with Sedgwick, which is incredibly valuable. Cohort learning is something that I've had an opportunity and a privilege to be heavily engaged in. Did my dissertation on it, but we find it to be highly engaging for the people who are involved to be able to step through the program with the same people. When we can, we'll make it participant-led. We'll assign certain things to groups or individuals, allow them to prepare material and put it back out to the organization so that they're in the midst of it. Don't be surprised if some of your senior leaders get tapped to do that same thing. So it's a partnership in terms between the university and Sedgwick as far as the people who are participating in a instructor-like role. It's one thing to go through material and learn it that way, but when you have to teach it, you tend to really grasp it. So we find that to be very powerful. Folks get excited about it, not necessarily up front, but once they're into it, they really like it. And of course, this is something that would unfold over time. You know, just for sake of argument, we'd talk about a 12-month program. There'd be online learning, a few face-to-face sessions if as best we could do that. But we would keep people engaged over a period of time to really let things soak in and be able to drive a multitude of points. To completely embrace, you think about your 5 core values, it's going to take time for people to really embrace it, to learn the material that will allow them to develop those behaviors that support those core values. So this is something that would go on for a period of time, maybe 12 months, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, I don't know, but I'd like us to be thinking about something that has a duration to it. And so I guess the last thing I'd say is my self-quote here. Leadership development is a major commitment by senior leadership that requires resources, attention, and more importantly, the will to see it through. I'd like to tell you that all the organizations that have come to us and committed to developing a long ongoing program for multiple cohorts, that all of those folks had the will in the end to see that through. Unfortunately, that's not the case. We have worked with several where that has happened, and the outcomes were really phenomenal. Be glad to talk with you about those. So anyway, that's kind of where we are, and I'm looking forward to whatever's next as we explore the possibility of working together, and see you soon, hopefully.